Hello, I'm Marco Galvan. Welcome to this mastering course. Let me talk a little bit about me. I'm an electronics engineer. I have a major in acoustics, and I hold several certificates for audio engineering as a musician too. I have more than 10 years of experience as a professional audio and music instructor at all levels, and I have more than 600 students worldwide in my online courses. So I hope this experience could be useful to you. Let's see what you are going to learn here. Well, in the first place, the mastering principles. What is mastering? What is mastering for? Its importance, and what are the most useful procedures and processors used while mastering, how to use that, which are the most important tools, and how to improve your audio working with those tools. In the end, we're going to be working in a song for the entire course. We're going to master that song from the beginning to the end, and I hope this could help you to master pretty much any kind of music. Let's see an example of what mastering can do in your audio file. For example, here it is, a little file without any mastering.
Held you in my arms. I thought that I could do no wrong when I...
Now, the very same file, but once it's mastered, ready for YouTube delivery.
Held you in my arms. I thought that I could do no wrong when I...
As you can see, the main difference may be the loudness or volume, but there are other processes involved in mastering which improve the audio quality. We will check all that. Who is this course for? Well, it could be very useful for music producers, for musicians, singers, people working or creating their own music, engineers, technicians, and even audio editors, software developers, video game developers, anybody trying to improve audio in their work. What do you need for this course? Well, you're going to need practice, because that's very important to achieve a good result. You'll need a DAW, anyone. It could be Pro Tools, Logic, whichever works for you. A pair of studio monitors is recommended, but you could use headphones instead if you don't have good monitors. Hardware processors are optional. The course is based on software plugins, but if you can access hardware processors for the practice, it could be a very good option. And finally, you need very good ears. Mastering is based on listening to the details, so your ears are the most important asset here, and of course this comes with practice and experience. I have to say that this course doesn't pretend to replace a professional mastering house. You are going to learn the basics to make a nice mastering work, and I hope this will help you with the practice and experience to achieve better results. But of course, if you want the most professional sound, you should go to a professional mastering engineer. So, if you are ready, let's get started. Well, hello guys, let's start with what is audio mastering. So, to understand mastering, we have to understand first how's the music production process. In this sense, we have to understand that in the music production process there are 3 stages. The first one is pre-production. In pre-production, we deal with songwriting or choosing the songs we are going to produce. Then we have to arrange those songs. This is to set the key, the tempo, the instruments, etc. Then we have to make a mock-up. This is a test. We can hear the mock-up, and so we can make decisions. This is usually done with MIDI instruments, for example. Then, when we have our mock-up ready, we can start with the production process, which actually has to do with performing. This is playing, singing, wherever, and recording that. Then we have the final stage, which is post-production. In this sense, we have to deal with editing. First, in the editing stage, what we do is to clean up our track, to select the best takes. Then we have the mixing process. Here, mixing engineer starts combining the different instruments, equalizing, applying effect, etc. And once our track is properly mixed, then we can master it. And in the mastering process, we are going to deal with different goals. The first one would be to get a good track balance, the tonal balance. What I mean with this? Well, the tonal balance is the amount of highs, mids, and lows in a track. We use equalizer for this task. Then we have dynamics control. We use compressors and limiters. This is the control of different volumes in our track. We have to deal too with image control. This I'm talking about here about stereo image, how stereo or mono our track is. Then we have to decide the final volume or the final loudness of our track. This is a very important topic. With the right mastering, we will get a good volume for our track, so it's very important. And as we can see, as mastering is the last stage in the whole process, is kind of a quality control stage. We have to make sure that the track we are mastering has the minimum standards of quality to go out, to be to take it to the stores, to take it to a social network, to the world. So that's the importance of mastering. Is the last stage, and we are going to learn all of these stages one by one. Okay, let's start with files preparation. What kind of files can we work with? And in this sense, we usually use stereo files for our work. These files should be WAV files, .wav or .av, which are the standard for uncompressed audio. We do not recommend MP3 nor AAC or any other kind of files. Those files are compressed and they are not recommended because the quality is lower. We do not recommend FLAC or Apple lossless either, so always the other kind of file, WAV or IF. We suggest the files to be to have no limiting at all. This is important because we need to apply limiting while mastering. So the mixing engineer shouldn't apply limiting or limiters on the master bus. The same would be about normalization. We do not want tracks with normalized. Why? Because we are going to do that kind of work while mastering. So just take it easy in that part, all right? Another important point, instead of being normalized, we recommend that the highest peaks in our files, they should be around -6 dB. So you have to take care about that when you receive your files to work. It's important to leave some room at the beginning and at the end of your file. Later you are going to cut, to trim those parts, but that's in the end of the mastering process. And perhaps the most important part is that we need well-mixed tracks. You know, mastering is not for fixing mixing problems. That's a mistake. Mastering is to improve a good mix, but we are not going to fix errors. So it's important to keep this in mind, right? There is another kind of mastering. I'm not going to use that kind of mastering for this course, which is called mastering by stems. What are the stems? Well, they are mixing groups. So some people feel comfortable working this way. For example, here we have 3 stems, one for music, one for background vocals, and one for lead vocals. And that's not bad, but in this case, you would have more flexibility for adjustments. But that's more kind of remixing, you know, and so we are mastering, and most of the time, we shouldn't do remixing. So I do not recommend working by stems. So see you in the next class. All right, let's talk about monitoring. monitoring is very important for mastering because we want to evaluate in a very accurate way what we are working with. So the types of monitors recommended for mastering, well, these are a little different of what you would expect. This should be full range monitors like this we are watching here. These are large monitors and they must have a great frequency response. I'm talking about at least from 30 hertz to 20 kilohertz, and that's a flat response. So this has to be premium monitors in that sense. They could be very expensive. I'm talking more than $8,000. Far field monitors. This means that this monitor should be able to produce large amounts of sound pressure level. I'm talking about above 100 dB, so that's a lot of pressure because you need to evaluate at loud volumes too. And it is recommended to have a calibrated subwoofer for your monitor purpose. So the near field monitors like this you are seeing now, those are not really recommended for mastering. Those are great for mixing, but not for mastering because they don't have that great response in low frequencies. They also have lower SPL, lower levels of sound, so you cannot really evaluate in a mastering situation with those. And headphones are not recommended. The sonic image you get with headphones is not the real stereo image that you want, so headphones are not recommended when mastering. Now, let's talk a little bit about positioning. Because you have your monitors, now you want to position them in your room. And so how could you do that? Well, here is a little example. You should avoid at least that your sweet spot, the point where you are sitting, it shouldn't be along the center of your room. This is because of standing waves. If you remain in the center, you will have bad response for low frequency, so avoid that part. As we're seeing here, the sweet spot is a little closer to the monitors than in the center line. Another important point is that you want your sound to travel as long as possible before reaching the wall and bouncing back. That is why it's recommended to point your monitors toward the longest dimension in your room, like in this picture. Also, when you are positioning your monitors, you have to try to form a triangle. In this way, you would get the best image, stereo image. You could measure that. Actually, I think it's important to measure this. Your monitor should be at ears height, around your ears, around your eyes, that the tweeters are pointing in that part. So you'll get the best response for high frequencies. Now, talking about acoustics, acoustics are crucial for good monitoring. And in mastering, you have to have the best acoustics. So to achieve that, we need to master in large rooms. This is because of the low frequencies. And large room, I'm talking about at least 120 cubic meters. So this is kind of large room. We have to avoid cubic rooms. Those are really bad for acoustics. And we need controlled reverberation. We don't want the sound bouncing back and forth in our room, so we need control of that. We also want good diffusion, the best diffusion that we can get or we can pay for, because this is a little expensive. And another recommendation is to avoid windows. This is why in a mastering studio like the one we are seeing right now, we don't have this control rooms window that we may find in recording studio. So the topic of acoustics is a little complicated. I'm planning to make a course on acoustics, but I think these are good recommendations for you. Very well. Now we're going to start with the practical part of the course, editing. What should be careful about with editing? Well, we have to check that our tracks, they don't have clicks, nor pops, nor noises in general. if our track is noisy, then we could try to do something. We are going to see a little example using a denoiser, which is a tool to extract the background noise. But if we cannot fix that, then we need to remix the song and use a new file without clicks and pops, because it's not easy to remove the noises without affecting the song. Another important part in our editing process is adjusting the track duration. We have to set the point where the track begins and where the track ends. That's part of our job. And finally, we have to create fade-ins and fade-outs in our track when we are editing. This is done usually at the end of the process. I'm just mentioning this right now, but when you have already finished your mastering, then you can create little fade-ins and fade-outs, or longer fade-outs or fade-ins, depending on the kind of song and music. So let's see how this works. All right, let's see the first practical part of this. We're going to deal with the editing, basic editing that we have to take care of while mastering. So this very first step is to import our audio file in our platform, our DAW. In this case, I'm going to be using Logic Pro, but you could use Pro Tools, you could use Nuendo, Cubase, etc. It doesn't really matter as long as you feel comfortable with your system. So the first thing that we have to do is to hear and watch for little errors in our file. We have to hear the whole song. In this case, I have this song here, and I want to see if it's starting. For example, it's starting in beginning in the right way. It is not chopped or anything like that. But let's hear it. Drums there. So I would prefer if my file was perhaps with more room in this area, so later I could cut it, but in this case it's too small. But it's not a big problem. Let's see the other part. Now we can see that our file looks okay. We need to hear the whole file.
In my arms, my love was doing the harm of real blue.
All right, so I don't see a big problem here. Let's see the loudest part, which are these peaks here. I need to make sure that they are not peaking in my system. Let's hear it.
When I held you,
I can see right here that the maximum level is around -6, -9, so it's okay. Oh, -3 there, that little peak. But it's okay, it's not a problem, so yeah, it seems like the track is ready to go. Let's see the final part. Remember, you have to hear the entire file and to look for little errors, distortions, clicks, pops, anything that doesn't work. And also to hear the mix, of course. So let's hear the final part.
So blue, I ain't got you.
This is important. We have to hear the last decay. For example, we are going to use a little fade here in the end of the process, the whole process, to make sure that this has a smooth decay overall. So I think there are no problems here, and you could use also your zooming tools like this in Logic, for example, but every DAW has this feature to change the zoom so you can have more precision in your editing. It doesn't affect the sound. It's just a visual help, visual aid. So okay, the track sounds good, it's a good mix, it looks good, we don't have problems, we can work with this track. Now we're going to see this very important processor, which is the denoiser. This plugin, this is a specialized plugin to remove the background noise. Now, this process could be used in mastering as a restoration process, but honestly, most of the time you don't want to use this while mastering because you are assuming that they made a good work while recording and mixing. But of course, if you are restoring old recordings, it may be from a tape or a vinyl or something like that, you could use this. So I'm going to use this file just as an example. Let's hear it, and you will notice that there is a lot of background noise. Well, so that's the idea. I am leaving this part here, which is the part with a lot of background noise, and I'm going to make a little loop here so you can hear it a little better. So that's the background noise that we're going to remove. So to use this kind of denoisers, they need to learn this noise. So in that sense, it is very important that you find a portion of your audio file without any important signal, but only noise. Like in this example, the processor is going to learn this kind of noise. So it has this control here. You can set the amount of learning time. The longer the time is the better the result. So I'm going to use the next step around 500 milliseconds, which should be enough. And what you have to do is to play that portion of noisy sound and hit learn. That's the original. And now you can hear the difference. So in this case, our processor is ready. Now we can let it process the whole file. Of course, you can adjust the amount of reduction. Maybe that's too much. I'm going to use around 16 dB, 10 dB, something like that. Let's try it. You can play a little bit with the threshold and the amount. Even with the attack and release, the attack is how fast the denoiser acts, and the release is how fast the denoiser stops working. So that's pretty much the idea. It's a very useful plugin. There are many out there. Most of them are commercial. The idea is to capture a part of the noise and then applies the noise reduction process. This can really help you to restore old recordings. Hello guys! The first topic we are going to learn is filters. But before that, let's start by learning something very important for understanding equalization. That is frequency and frequency ranges. Frequency means how fast an object vibrates. This object could be a string, an air column, a membrane, etc. If it vibrates really fast, we say it has high frequency,
and it will have a high pitch. On the other hand, if it vibrates slowly, then it has low frequency and a low pitch. Frequency is measured in hertz. There's also the kilohertz. 1 kilohertz equals 1000 hertz. With filters and equalizers, we may hear the word octave very often. An octave is the double or half the frequency. For example, let's hear note A3, which equals 220 hertz. Okay, now the note A4, which is the same note, but it's an octave above, it is 440 hertz. And if we go one octave above of that, then we have the note A5, which is 880 hertz. So that's the octave, the difference between the same note, it's a double or half the frequency. Now, maybe you noticed that these three notes sounded with different loudness, right? Let's see why is that. Humans can only hear sound in certain frequency range, that is between 20 and 20 kilohertz. This is only a theoretical range, but let's keep that. It is very important to understand that we cannot hear all frequencies equally loud. The graphic shows that we need more energy to hear bass and treble sounds and less energy for mid frequencies. And that changes with volume too, so our ear is not linear at all, which makes something complicated to use equalizers without proper ear training. So if we want to learn how to equalize, then we need to educate our ear to recognize some frequency ranges first. The first one is the very low frequency range. We don't manipulate so much this range. Actually, we usually filter this one. Let's hear an example. Now we are going to hear a fragment of music, and I'm going to emphasize this range with an equalizer, so hopefully you will hear the difference. Maybe this range is going to be a little hard to perceive because it's very low, but let's try it. So it's hard to hear, right? Because there's little musical content, just a few bass notes. For most loudspeakers, we cannot hear this range. It's mainly used only for effect sounds like earthquakes or explosions in movies, so in music it doesn't make so much sense. So let's check the next one. The next range is around an octave above, and this is the low frequency range. We have the punch of sound. It's very important for kick drum or bass. This range is reproduced mainly by subwoofers. So if you don't have a subwoofer right now, maybe you won't hear a lot, but for many other systems, you may hear some difference. Let's hear it. Probably you heard some kind of what we call punch. This is very important for music, mainly for kick drum and bass. Okay, now the next range is another octave above. It's called the upper bass range, and this may have what we call a boomy sound or muddy, you know, and it is very important for many instruments like trombone, cello, guitar, piano. Most instruments work with this range, and also the male vocals. Let's hear it. Okay, there are more ranges left, but we will deal with them in the next lesson. Okay, let's continue with the next ranges. The next one is called low mid-range. This has the body or fullness of sound. It's also a very important range because it has many resonances, and most instruments generate frequencies in this range. So we have instruments like flute, violin, trumpet, or female vocals. Let's hear it. And around 1 kilohertz, we find the mid-range. This is the most important range for voice and music. We have the definition of instruments and timbres here, and if we overemphasize it, it may sound like a telephone sound, so we should be careful. And there's also a very important range because it has many voice consonants like the sound of K or T or N. And this range is reproduced by every audio system, so it's the most important range. Let's hear it. Okay, then we have this critical range, the high mid. It's critical because it is the most sensitive range for the human ear. Remember the last lesson graphics? So here we have the clarity of instruments and the presence of vocals. So it's very important, but on the other hand, if we overemphasize it, it can cause harshness. This range is reproduced by most tweeters, and so it's very important for vocals, so it's important for music in general. Cymbals and guitars can sound irritating in this range, so if you have these cases when the cymbals or electric guitars are sounding harsh, you should attenuate this range. Let's hear it. Around an octave above, we have the treble range. This is the bright of sound. And also it's the range of sibilance, which is the excess of S sound. You know, many recordings you hear like the S sound very loud, so you have to deal with this range. It is also very important for instruments like shakers, hi-hat cymbals, or the bright of strings, etc. This is reproduced by tweeters. Let's hear it. Finally, the high treble or very high frequency range. This has what we call the sparkle of sound, which gives the sensation of space. Is reproduced only by some tweeters, so you don't have this range with any kind of sound system. Perhaps some of you won't be able to hear this. And many people can't hear this range because they have lost their hearing capabilities in this range. So That usually happens many times. Let's hear this. Well, I recommend to you to practice a little bit with this material so your ears gets the idea of how these ranges sound and what they do to music. That's the basis of equalization, and it's very important.
Okay, now let's talk about equalization while mastering. Equalization is very important because this allows us to balance the amount of highs, mids, and lows. So there are some general rules that we should keep in mind. The first is that while mastering, we are always dealing from a general point of view. This means that I'm not going to equalize trying to fix, for example, a voice or to fix the guitar. That's not a good approach because you cannot control only the guitar while mastering. You have to hear from a general point of view. This means that you have to hear the whole song and look what's good for the whole song, not only for a particular instrument. If you need equalization for a particular instrument, then you probably need to remix your song. Then another recommendation is to use a high pass filter around 30 hertz when you are mastering music. If you are working with maybe a video game or a film, it could be a different story. But 30 hertz for music is good because this removes subharmonics. So it's not really necessary to have a lot of content below 30 hertz. Another important point is you have to use soft curves while equalizing. This is like in the image. We see that we don't have big peaks of equalization. That's usually a good starting point. And you are going to achieve this with subtle equalization. I'm talking about 2 dBs, 1 dB, around that. If you need more than that, 4, 6 dBs while equalizing, well, that probably means that you need to remix, okay? And to do this, there are a couple of equalizers that are very useful while mastering. This is the shelving equalizer and the Baxandall equalizer. Well, we're going to deal with those right away. Now let's start equalizing. What we want to achieve with the equalizer is to have a good balance between the different frequencies. So let's hear this song and see how we can apply EQ. Here I have this basic EQ from Logic. You could use pretty much any equalizer. The general rule is to try to use the best equalizer you have. But, well, this could be a analog EQ, a digital EQ. I mean, each processor has its own sound, so you have to experiment. Well, a good tool in this case would be the analyzer, like here, because then we can see, we can have a visual feedback or what's going on here in our frequencies. So for example, let me change this part, and then we can see the amount of energy in the whole spectrum. So that's a good tool. So let's begin. The first thing that I would recommend while equalizing is, of course, you have to hear and you have to try to listen to what needs to be cut, not boosted, but cut. I have a course about equalization where I can dive in all these topics with so much more detail. So I'm just saying the general rules here, but I really recommend you to take the equalization course in order to equalize with more precision. And I have listening examples there. Well, let's start here with a high-pass filter. This is good because we can get rid of the extra lows we may have. A good starting point would be to set it around 30 hertz, so we can have a better impact in low frequencies doing this kind of equalization. So let's hear the other bands. I want to control. I think I should cut a little bit here.
When I held you in my arms.
When I'm saying a little bit, I'm talking about 1 dB, 2 dBs, okay? And also look that my curve is very soft, you know? I'm not using this kind of curves. This kind of equalization could be used sometimes, but it's not the general in mastering, because an equalization like this would mean that there was a problem in the mix. So it's not the most usual case. So a good mix doesn't require a lot of equalization. It has to be way softer. Maybe something like this. Let me hear it.
I thought that I could do no wrong.
So you have to be careful in this area, the mid frequencies. Those are really important when you are equalizing. Let me add a little low.
And I held you in my arms. My love was doing the heart.
I'm going to use shelving EQ, which is this. You could use a shelving or a back sandal equalizer, which are pretty similar. Now let's try it.
And I feel blue.
You don't want this kind of equalization, all right? You don't want 9, 10 dBs. That's insane. So usually it's just a little bit.
I knew that I would. So
something like that.
blue, so blue.
I also want to add a little bit of sparkle, little high frequency. So let's hear it.
That you, I feel blue. I know that I would.
I need more instruments.
When I held you in my
Let's compare. It's important to use the bypass so we can compare. All right, that's kind of that's the kind of EQ you are going to use while mastering. All right, it's not really aggressive. It's just very subtle. Your ears have to be the judges in all this. So another important frequency that you should be aware of is the around 1 kilohertz, because that's where the voice is very important, and other instruments too.
held you in my arms. I thought that I could do no wrong. When I held you in my arms, my love was too.
Honestly, in this mix, I don't find it that it needs to boost in this area, so I'm going to leave it just like that. And this would be the starting equalization. So it's kind of the equalization I would use in this song for this stage. Now, I want to show you another tool which I find really important. I have another equalizer here. This is especially for mastering. And, well, we can have the analyzer too. Here it is a real-time analyzer. But there are some equalizers that have this option. If I go here with right-click, in this EQ, I have this average time, and I can set it to a couple of seconds. And so what this is going to show me is the average spectrum in my whole song.
When I held you.
So as you can see, now it's not moving a lot.
My love was doing
Right?
the heart.
Now, what you are going to see in most songs, pretty much in every style of music, is this kind of tendency, you know, more lows and the curve going downwards in a very soft, smooth curve. All right, that's pretty common. What you don't want to see is a big peak in some places. For example, if I use the other equalizer and let me try something.
I feel blue.
For example, something like this,
I know that I would.
which sounds
I
bad.
feel blue.
Look how it's represented
I know that I
in this area.
would. So blue.
So we can see that there are some peaks here, so we are not having our smooth curve. All right, it looks that there's another peak here. We should be listening to that and taking care that this is not a bad resonance. All right, it may be a solo or something like that. That would be okay. So most songs will have a pretty uniform curve. This is an average curve. So it's a good tool to help our ears. Maybe I could equalize a little bit this area so I could take care of that. And as you can see, my amount of dBs is very, very, very subtle. But you have to listen to that. Let me bypass the other cue. So that would be it about equalizing. It's a lot of work for your ears, but it's pretty much the general idea. You have the low frequencies for punch, you have the low mids, you have the high mids, very important for vocals and for instruments and clarity. And then you have the sparkle and bright section in the around 6K or 10K. Very good. Now it's time for dynamics control. Dynamics are very important for music. It's really useful to improve the punch, the impact in the song, and the general volume. So for that we use compressors, and we could use also limiters, but that's another topic. So in this sense, we could use many kinds of compression styles. The first we're going to see is serial compression. Serial compression, also known as downward compression, is pretty much like in the image. We have the signal, it goes into the compressor, and then it goes out compressed. So when we are using this kind of compression in mastering, we need to use very small ratios. I'm talking about 2 to 1, 2.5 to 1. It's kind of that general rule. Then the attack time should be kind of slow, from 50 milliseconds to 150 milliseconds, something like that, because we don't want to destroy the transients in our song. So we have to be very careful with this. We're going to see this in action in a few minutes. And the release time could be set in different ways, but I'm going to show you a time related to music. So how is this? Well, let's see an example. Let's say that we are mastering a song which tempo is 85 beats per minute. So we have to do a little math here. It is 60,000 divided by the BPM. So it's 60,000 divided by 85 in this case. And so we have that the quarter note equals to 700 milliseconds. So this means that every 700 milliseconds we are going to get 1 bit in this case. So we should set a release time in multiples of this value. It could be the half, the double, 3 times, etc. This will make our compressor to work with rhythm, in rhythm with the music. And so is when you say that the compressor is working with the music, and that gives you a very effective way to compress. Let's see how it works. Well, now it's time for compression. There are different kinds of compression that we could apply to our track. So here I'm going to talk about the series compression, which should be in the same line that the other processors. For example, in this case, here I have the previous equalization that I already did to this track, and then I have the compressor. So this is a serial process. And there are questions all the time regarding what should be first, the equalizer or the compressor, because I could change this order actually pretty much like that, and that could also work. So how's the right solution? There's no right solution. You have to try maybe both ways and see what's better for you, what works best for that particular song. One approach I usually do is to try to fix the main problem first. What I mean with this is that if the song main problem is in dynamics, then I would go and compress first and then equalize. But if the song main problem is frequency or equalization, then I would change this way. But anyway, you have to try both and let your ears decide, okay? So let's see how to work the serial compression. It has to be very subtle. Here we have our track, and as we can see, the track has a lot of dynamics in this area. That I'm going to use this part just for this sample, but actually you have to hear the whole song and the different sections. I have this compressor which emulates a VCA compressor. You should check my compression course for more details about that. But then, what are the initial settings? Well, we have to start with the threshold to the maximum. Then a very light ratio. I'm going to use 1.5 to 1. Okay. Then my makeup gain or output gain is at 0 dB. And then my attack and release in the middle. About the release, I'm going to use this formula that we saw. This song is around 115 BPMs. So I'm going to use my calculator, and we have to divide 60,000 divided by 115, and that gives me 521, so around 500. So as an initial point, I'm going to set my release around 500. Okay, this means that my compressor is going to be releasing the compression around a bit. So this is locking my compressor to the song's tempo. In this part, my compressor is not working yet because I don't see any activity in the gain reduction meter. So I have to try to lower my threshold. There it is. It's starting. Usually the gain reduction for mastering, it should be around 2-3 dBs, maybe more if the song asks for that, but in general I'm talking about 3 dB, a good starting point. So I'm going to play it a little more. This is a lot of compression, okay? Not that much.
When I held you in my arms,
Okay.
I thought that I could do no wrong.
Now I'm going to adjust the attack. If I use a very short attack like this, I'm going to lose the transients and the high frequency. And if I give a very slow attack, I may get more bright. So it's a matter of taste, and you will have to hear, to listen very carefully. So let's hear the comparison. Look. Listen the transients, the attack in the guitar. I'm going to play it again. Okay, so I hope you can hear that. Actually, you should get a very good monitoring system to hear this, or very good headphones. But, well, I'm going to set this according to my own taste. So let me try it. I don't want this. Usually this is going to be kind of slow for most songs.
When I held you in my arms, I thought that I could do no wrong.
I'm going to leave it something like that.
Now,
it's very important to compensate. I am reducing. Here I am reducing around 3 dBs. So I have to compensate with the makeup gain or output. It's important to make sure that you don't have the auto gain engaged, so it's off. And I'm going to compensate around 3 dB, which is what I'm taking out. This is very important. Let's hear, and I'm going to bypass so we can hear the difference. There's without compression. Oh, that's better.
when I held you in my arms, I thought that I could do no wrong. When I held you in my arms, my love was doing the harm, and
So I hope you can hear the difference. It's very subtle, but it actually is important because it's kind of a gluing compression, right? So finally, I'm going to make some tests here. This worked with around 500 milliseconds. So I'm going to try the double. We have to use multiples of this amount, so around 1000, and see how it works, and maybe 250 and see how it works. This is 240. Bear with 500.
when I held you in my arms, I thought that I could do
It's softer.
no wrong.
Actually, if I go to 1000, it's going to sound even softer.
When I held you in my arms, I thought that I could do no wrong. When I held you in my arms, my love.
All right. Where I'm listening is that 1000 is more constant compression. I don't really like for this mood, but it's a matter of taste, all right? Maybe you think that this is better for the mood of the song, for the arrangement, so you are free to go with it. It's part of the art of all this process. So this would be pretty much the idea behind a serial compression. You have to practice a lot, and mainly to let your ears guide you. Well, there is another kind of compression style which is called parallel compression. The point here is that we have our signal, our original signal, and that's mixed with a compressed signal, the same signal, but once it went through a compressor. So we mix both signals, and that's what is called parallel compression. This is also called upwards compression, because in this case we are not affecting the peaks in our signal. We are actually letting the natural signal flow, and then we are adding a compressed part of it. So it's like pushing the sounds that are softer, we are pushing them upwards, so hence the name. This kind of compression requires different settings. In this case, for example, we need higher compression ratios, around 4:1, 5:1, and even more. The attack time should be faster. It could be 2-3 milliseconds, 20-30 milliseconds as much. And the release time is also related to music, so as we saw in the last class. It is very important here to control the parameter for the mix, the dry-wet. We have to control how much of the compressed part of the signal we want to add. So this balance is to taste, but we are going to see in this example. Well, the next kind of compression is the parallel compression. It actually is the opposite to the serial compression. And in this case, there are two ways to apply this kind of compression. The first one is using a compressor with a mix control or dry-wet control like this one. This is a very practical way to achieve that. And the other way, which may be the only way for hardware or maybe in another situation, is to use auxiliary sends or to duplicate the track and apply compression in the second in the duplicate. So I'm not going to do that way here, but it is possible. I mean, you have to duplicate your file in another track and apply the compression in that track and then add both of them. That would be a parallel compression. In this case, I'm going to use another compressor, a different kind of compressor. This is a FET emulation, and it's next to the serial compression. So here I'm making my chain. Sometimes you may use both kind of compressions, the serial and the parallel, but it's not a rule. Actually, sometimes serial may not work and parallel would be better. So in this case, I'm going to use both of them just as an example. The initial settings are very different to the serial. So I'm going to use a very higher ratio, around 5:1. Then I'm going to set a very fast attack in this case, and release. In this case, I'm going to leave it kind of in the middle. And let's start. I'm going to lower the threshold until I have very aggressive compression. I'm going almost for 9 dB, something like that. So I have to compensate that. Look now. Now, as you can hear, this is a very aggressive compression. You are listening that effect, which is called pumping. This kind of volume up and down. So we don't want that. I'm going to try to minimize that a little bit with release. Very fast release creates more dramatic pumping. So I'm going to play a little bit with this one. I'm looking to avoid, what I want to do is to avoid the distortion. If I have a very fast release, I'm going to have a lot of distortion. So I want to avoid that. So that doesn't sound good, but that's why we have to use our mix control. So now I'm going to take the mix to 0%, which is like taking my compressor away, and I'm going to add it a little bit while listening. I'm going to be using perhaps around 30% to 50%. It's a matter of taste here, but those are usual settings. So what we have to pay attention in is in the lowest sounds. As we can see here, our track has a lot of transients, a lot of dynamics in the peaks, and this is the parallel compression doesn't affect the peaks. It just adds the lowest part. Let's try it.
I ain't got you.
Something like that. Listen to the lower parts. I'm bypassing. The strings, in this case, the strings and the pads sound a little louder. Try it again.
I ain't got you.
I could add a little more. Nice. So that's the idea. Of course, you can play with the release and try to see if you have a better effect. But that's pretty much the idea. You need an aggressive compression, but you are not using all that compression in one place. You are adding just a little amount of that. So I'm going to bypass my whole chain so you can hear the different effects of the whole process, because sometimes in mastering, as each process is very subtle, then you may not feel you are doing too much, but that's the idea. We want to respect the original mix. So let's try it.
I ain't got you.
This is the original one. Actually, what I did is to lower the parallel compression a little more because it was too loud. So that's the idea. It's a matter of taste in the end. This is the part of the artistic part of the mastering process, where you have to decide if parallel compression works better, or serial, or both, or many different options. But it's up to you and up to your ears. Well, and the last kind of compression that we are going to see is the multiband compression. Multiband compression basically is the combination of crossover and multiple compressors. For example, in this image, we can see that we have 3 bands. So our signal is divided by 3, and then we apply 3 different compressions for each. So this is good because we could compress more the lows and the mids with less compression and all kinds of combinations. Each band can be processed in a different way, which is good, but also the results could be very drastic if we don't use this with care. So we should be careful using compression this way, because we could change the mix in a very drastic way. So let's see an example. Another kind of compression that we can use while mastering is that multi-band compression. I have this one here. This is a multi-band compressor. This is from the plugin Ozone, which is specialized for mastering, and I'm using that. But anyway, you could use any other multi-band compression. So how these compressors work? Well, they are pretty much a crossover. They have this crossover section, which could be adjusted in different frequencies. And each of them is a different compressor with different settings. So that's the point with this kind of tools, because I can apply more compression for the lows and less compression for the mids, or vice versa. So I have a lot of control. I can insert bands in some of these compressors, or remove bands according to my needs. Actually, the most common scenario would be maybe to use 3 bands. 1 for lows, 1 for mids, and 1 for highs. Now, these kind of tools are important when you really need to apply different amounts of compression in different bands, which is not usually the case when the mix is good. But if you don't have a very good mix and you cannot remix that, then the multiband compressor could be a good tool. So let's start with this. In the first place, we need to adjust the frequencies. A good starting point could be around 150 hertz for the lows and the mids, and around 4 kilohertz for the highs and the mids. So it's up to you, it's up to your music. We can do this with this solo function. I'm going to start it. What you want in these cases is to take all the low frequency, the punch, away, and all the high frequency away, the bright and the sparkle. So you get only the mid frequencies, which are the most important in the music and in mastering. I need more vocals.
I could do no wrong when I held you in my arms. My love was to.
Okay, so this could be a good starting point. Now, the next part, each compressor has its own threshold and ratio and attack release, etc. So it's pretty much like adjusting a serial compressor, but in this case, 3 compressors. So I'm going to leave this ratio kind of low, 1.7 to 1. Now, this compressor has this feature of auto gain. So I'm going to leave this on because in that case, I can lower the threshold and I can hear the compensation. So that's pretty useful in this case. There it is. It starts compressing. This is the gain reduction. Now this part here is what it's called the knee, the compressor's knee. If I raise the ratio, I have higher knee. The goal here is to try that our peaks are around our knee. That's pretty much the basis in most compression styles, but it may change, of course. So it's just a visual guide. The most important tool for you are your ears. Oh. Of course, you don't want to destroy the dynamics, you just want to control the dynamics. So it's going to be a small amount of compression. Let's try the other band. I'm going to slow the attack. Well, and now the highs. There are a lot of transients there, so I can apply maybe a little more compression. Always make sure that you are not over compressing. It's very important because to take away compression is very difficult, so it is better to keep compression moderate. All right, let's try it. The whole set.
When I held you in my arms,
That would be pretty much the idea. Now I'm going to bypass the general bypass. What you're going to find most of the time is that your attack and release times for low frequencies are longer than for mid and for high frequencies. All right, so that's the general rule, but of course you could change that if you need it.
I thought that I could do no wrong when I held you in my arms. My love was doing the harm. And
What is good about this kind of compression is that it could be very transparent, very light, and in this case, for example, a peak in the low frequency doesn't affect my mids or my highs, so that's a very good option here. Now, finally, you have to be careful because with this kind of compressors, you have a manual gain for each band, so I could easily change the whole balance here. Let me show you. I could raise the low frequency, for example.
in my arms, when I held you in my arms.
For example, like that.
Thought that I could do no
Or
wrong when I held you in my arms.
maybe the mids.
My love was doing the harm, and I feel blue.
Whoa, sorry. Or the highs.
Feel blue. I knew that I would.
So what I want to tell you is that with this compressor, you have a lot of control, but also a lot of power, and you could easily change the balance and leave your track with a lot of lows or with lack of mids. So you have to be very, very careful in this case. Of course, if you need to make aggressive changes because that's good for the final product, then go ahead. You could mix this multiband compressor with a serial compressor or parallel compressor. It's up to you. It's not very useful to use many compressors, but it could work depending on the style you are working. Very well. Now we are going to see another processor, which is to control harmonic content. And these are called exciters or enhancers, depending on the model. What's the point with these processors? Well, with the equalizer, we can increase the volume or lower the volume of certain frequencies. But what these do, the exciters, they create new harmonics. They excite the content so new harmonics are present. And that's a difference. You get a brighter sound, a clearer sound, but it doesn't come from the signal itself. It has a lot to do with the kind of processor, with the kind of exciter. So each processor has a unique tone, a unique sound. So there are many different brands and models. We're going to hear some of them in example. And usually they only have a single control. This is the drive control and dry wet process or the mix process. So here we're going to deal with the amount of harmonics that is controlled with the drive control. And then with the mix control, we make the blend. We have to use this in a moderate way because it's like ear candy. So we have to be careful of not overusing them. So let's try them. The next processor is important, but maybe not as important as the others that we have already seen. So in this case, I'm talking about the harmonic exciter or enhancers. This creates new harmonics to try to recover life in the mix because they can add liveness or depth to the mix. So the general rule is that we have to use them carefully and in a moderate amount. So here it is one. I'm using ozone. What I like about this one is that you can use different bands for processing the harmonic content. Anyway, I'm going to use only one band for this example. So here I have different settings for different kinds of electronic circuits, emulations. In this case, I'm going to try them all and see what's the effect in the song and which one fits best. So
When I held you in my
I'm
arms,
going to raise the amount.
do no wrong. When I held you in my arms, my
Let's
love
try it
was
retro.
doing the heart
There's a lot of distortion.
of
In that case, I have to reduce the amount.
I know that
The amount is like the drive, so more amount is going to give me more drive, more distortion. It's harmonic distortion, so this distortion is good. Actually, that's what we want. More distortion, it means that we have more harmonics. But the point is to be careful in that amount of distortion.
when I held you in my arms, I thought that I could do no wrong. When I held you in my arms,
As we can hear in the tape setting, there's a lot of distortion, but it gives us more mid frequencies. The tube or valve gives us more body in this part of the spectrum.
when I held you in my arms, I thought that I could do no wrong. When I held you in my arms, my love was doing
I like
the
this one.
heart.
So, once you have your setting with the drive amount, then we take it off with the mix control, and then we are going to add it a little by little.
When I held you in my arms, I thought that I could do no wrong. When I held you in my arms,
Let's compare.
my love was doing the heart of real blue. I know that I would of real blue.
Like that.
I know that I would.
I think I like that result. So that's pretty much the idea. You can try it different. It's very subjective, this part. So check it out with your own processor. There are many other harmonic exciters or enhancers out there, and try to find the one that sounds best to you. Very well. Now we're going to talk about this very specialized process. It's called MS processing, which comes from mid-side processing. What is this about? Well, the MS signals. This comes from the stereo miking technique, which uses the stereo information in a mid channel and a side channel. So all the central information is used with a channel, a single mono channel, and all the lateral information uses a side or S channel. So you can control the amount of stereo image, the stereo information, and the central mono information in an independent way, which is very useful when you are recording different instruments. Well, the MS processing is pretty much the same, but we are going to use processors to achieve this. To do that, we need a codification. That is, for example, the left channel equals to the sum of the mono channel and the stereo channel. On the other hand, the right channel is equals to the difference between these channels. That's pretty much what the coder does. So this codec system transforms a left and right signal into an MS signal. So it's back and forth with this kind of codecs. When we are dealing with a signal with the left-right format, we can manipulate the stereo and panoramic control. On the other hand, when we are manipulating the mid-side information, we can change the ambience, the stereo ambience, and the wideness of the signal. So this could be useful in mastering in the following way. We have our stereo signal, and then we have to go through a coder so we can get an MS signal and then process the MS signal in a different way. That is, we could process the central information in one way and the lateral information in another way. We could do this with many different processors as we may need, for example, equalization, dynamics, etc. Until we are done, we have to return or recover the original left-right signal with a decoder. So that's pretty much the idea. What are the advantages of all this? Well, we have many applications. For example, with a mid-side control, we can change the vocal balance in our mix. For example, we can raise the volume of the vocals or lower that. We could apply different kinds of equalization for the central channel or for the lateral channel. For example, if a guitar, which is usually panned to one side or another, we can apply equalization just to the lateral elements. The same would be with compression and any other kind of processor. There are some plugins, some processors that have codec integrated, so we don't need to apply this codification and decodification. It is in the very same plugin, and that's very practical. So let's see a practical example. Well, let's see now the practical example. Here I have a stereo track. All right, and now we're going to use this plugin, which is a free plugin you can download and install. It works in every platform. This plugin has the option to change the volume of the mid channel or the side channel. So let's hear it. For example, let's mute the mid channel. We can hear only the lateral information. Or with the other channel, we hear only the mono information. Of course, we can change the mix between these channels, which is very useful. I'm going to lower. For example, my bass is gone, my bass drum is gone, my kick drum, because they are panned to the center. So that's the power of this kind of processor. We have to be very careful though, because you can change the whole mix if you don't use this carefully. Now, how could we process this? Well, there's another mode of operation, which is called encoding. And in this case, the plugin is going to transform my stereo signal into a mid-side signal. Let's hear it. In this case, the left side is only the mid channel and the right side is the side channel. That's only mid information. And this is only side information. So they are not left-right anymore. Now it's mid and side, okay? Now, we could apply some processing here. For example, I'm going to use this equalizer. It's important to use an equalizer that has the option to work as a dual mono. Most DAWs have this option for the plugins. Dual mono gives me the possibility to control in an independent way the left and the right channel. So now this left channel is not going to be the left channel but the mid channel, and this one is going to be the side channel. Now after that we have to place another decoder now in the decoding mode, so we can transform again our mid-side signal into a stereo left and right. And so in this way we could hear the effect. Let's try it. my left is going to be mid, for example. Here I'm equalizing only the mid channel. For example, I could fix something in the bass or in the snare drum or the vocals. And this channel is going to move or process the lateral channel. This means that I'm not affecting the vocals here, nor the bass, nor the kick drum, etc. So this is a very powerful way to process, because I could do this chain with equalizer, with a compressor, etc. It depends on what you need to fix. Then finally, there's a possibility to use another kind of plugin. In this case, for example, this processor has the option, this is the ozone. The normal mode is a stereo mode, but I could change it to mid-side mode. And in this way, we can hear and process each channel independently. For example, let's hear only side. That's just the side. And we can equalize it. It's pretty much what we did before. It's just the lateral information. And I can apply a different processor for the mid channel. For example, with these guitars, I want to take a little harshness away without affecting the vocals, for example. And I can switch back and forth. So it's a very useful processor. There are a couple of processors out there where you can have this integrated decoding processor in the same plugin, so you don't have to build your chain like this before. It's a matter of taste, and remember, we have to try to see what options we have before applying any processing. But this is another very powerful tool to fix our audio. Another processor that we could use in mastering, although it is not really popular for that, is the reverb processor. So we can generate reverb, and we can add a little reverb in our mastering. They are more effective when we are working with live projects or acoustic projects, maybe a quartet, string quartet, or something like that. They are not really very useful for pop, rock, EDM. They create the illusion of depth. So they can work, they can help us a little bit, but we have to understand that reverb is mostly used in mixing situations, not really mastering, but it could be a useful tool sometimes. We could use the typical algorithms like whole or room. And if we use reverb, it's a good idea to keep the decay time or the reverb time related with the tempo, just as we saw with the compressor release, and the 60,000 divided by BPMs formula. And we have to use this with care. We shouldn't overuse reverb. They are only used once in a while. So let's hear how they could be applied. The next processor in our chain would be the reverb. It's important to clarify that this is a very optional process. Usually reverb is used in the mixing stage. So to use reverb during mastering is not that common, but in some styles with some kind of tracks or songs, it may work. Mainly if we are talking about ballads like this, or maybe acoustic recordings, etc. So as you can see here, I have my processors. The first is an equalizer, then I have a compressor, the exciter, and now I have the reverb. Of course, this order could be changed to experiment, but it's a general guide. Well, in this case, I'm using this plugin, which is the native reverb from Logic Pro. But of course, you could use the best reverb you can have. It's up to you. And also remember that in this course, we are using plugins only. And this is for practical reasons. But actually, you could apply pretty much the same concepts using hardware processors, and maybe the result could be somewhat better, depending on the quality of your processor. Now, this song has 115 BPMs. So that's an important number because we're going to set the decay time in our reverb. And to do that, we are going to use the formula 60,000 divided by 115. That gives us around 500 milliseconds. Now, if we multiply that times 3, we're going to get around 1.5 seconds, which could be a good starting point for our reverb time, all right? So that's only a general rule. Of course, you could use a different setting, but most of the time works pretty well. The point is that this reverb time has to be related with the tempo in the song. So a faster song will get a shorter reverb time, and that will help us to get this reverb going with the music. Now I'm going to use the wet knob to increase reverb while listening.
I feel blue. I know that I would. I feel blue.
I don't want this kind of setting.
I know.
I mean, it may sound nice in some cases, but actually I'm giving too much reverb to a song that already has reverb. So this is maybe too much in most cases. So I'm going to be way more conservative and to apply just a subtle amount of reverb.
I feel blue. I know that I would. I feel blue. I know that I would. So blue, so blue, I ain't got you.
Okay, I think that's what I would use in this case. If I use reverb for this song, I would use a very subtle amount of reverb because I don't want to make a new mix. I just want to polish the original mix. So in this case, I am listening only a portion of the song, but actually you should listen to the whole piece, and it's up to you and to your ears. Well, another process that is very important in mastering is to check the image and the phase in our track. To do this, we need a special tool, which is called phase correlation meter. It's like the one we are seeing here. This measures how similar are the left and the right channels in terms of phase. So if we have a mono signal, then we get 100% correlation. It would be in the 1. So if they are completely different, the meter will be around 0. And for most cases, we want positive levels. Actually, that's pretty much what we have to make sure about. So negative values in the negative scale, that means that one channel is with inverse polarity. So that's not good because our track could cancel. We always have to check that our track is on the positive side, and we can change that with editing if we need to fix something. Most tracks are around 80%, 70%. It depends on what kind of sound in the mix comes. But what we have to check is that our track is not in the 100%, I mean in the 1, and it's not too close to 0. So this is really common for most tracks, and that's what we should try to achieve while mastering. Let's hear how this sounds. Well, this next processor is one of the most interesting, maybe, because we are going to deal with the stereo image. In this case, I have this specialized plugin for that. This allows me to control the amount of stereo information or mono information, and I can do that with multiple bands. But first, let's get started with only one band. So what's this all about? Well, let me play the song.
So blue, I ain't got you.
Here in this graph, I have the phase correlation. So a 1 would be mono and a 0 would be stereo. So I can change that. Let's try it.
Like losing my heart.
I'm going to make it more stereo.
So sad, so bad, I ain't got you.
And you can hear in your stereo system that the image is wider.
When I held you in my arms,
Now I'm going to make it more mono.
that I could do no wrong.
This is
When
totally
I
mono.
held you in my
You can see the meter.
arms, my love was doing the heart of real blue. I know that I would.
So this is the part that I was saying that we should aim for an 80%, 70% or so. Another point that we have to check while mastering is our phase relationship and cancellations. Let's see an example.
So blue, I ain't got you.
If I invert the left side, for example, you can hear something funny, but also you can read on the meter that something is not right because it's on the negative side. This is because there are cancellations. This is normal. And this is with phase inversion.
Arms, I thought that I
Now, the real problem with an inverted phase is when we sum in mono. Let's check it out. You see that? There's a lot of cancellation.
real sad, like losing my heart.
Let me try this setting. Total cancellation, because we have a mono signal and we have one side inverted. So that's the worst case, of course.
Arms, I thought that I could do no wrong. When
So in general, what we want is our song to be around 80%. So I can change that with this control, but I could also use different bands, which sometimes would be nice. For example, let me try it this way. I'm going to set the low frequency. I want the bass here, the body, the bottom, and this section is usually very mono. I'm going to make it a little more mono. Maybe like that. Now the highs.
so bad,
This could be more stereo, actually. Well, not too much. It is very open already. Let's check the mids.
wrong. When I held you in my arms, my love was doing the
The mids were a little too open to my taste, so I am reducing that. But it's up to you, remember.
so blue, I ain't got you. Off real sad, like losing my heart.
So you can see here
Off real feel sad,
we are around 80.
like losing my heart.
The good part of this is that we have a good monocompatibility.
Ooh, so blue, I ain't got you. I feel sad, like losing my heart. I feel sad, like losing.
So that's the idea. We have to take care that our song doesn't have problems with phases, and to fix that, inverting the phase in one channel. If we don't have this processor, then we could use an audio editor to change the polarity of one channel. The last process in our mastering chain should be a limiter. And they are also called brick wall limiters because they set the maximum peak in the whole track. So this maximum peak is called ceiling, output ceiling, and we have to set it somewhere below 0 because 0 is the maximum value. So we have to set it a little lower. A good recommendation would be around minus 0.3 dBs if we are working with audio files like WAV files. But if we are working for MP3 or another coding system, then it's recommended to have it a little lower, around minus 1 dB would be good. The other process that we have to set is the release time. And this has to be done according to the dynamics of the song. So if we want a fast release, we will get more loudness, but we may have more distortion, so we have to be careful about it, very careful in mastering. On the other hand, if we set a slow release, we won't have too much loudness, but we will have less distortion. So this is a compromise here. Your ears have to make the final decision. So let's hear an example. Very well. Now we have to see a very important topic. It's the loudness levels in our tracks. When we are mastering, we are in control of the general loudness. So we have to set this loudness accordingly. But what is loudness? Well, this is the subjective perception of the sound intensity. The subjective word is very important. Loudness is something that it's not general or generalized the way we perceive. I may perceive a sound as louder than you. So this is why it's called subjective perception. Now, this is what we usually name volume, but the technical name is loudness, right? Depends on many factors, for example, the sound intensity, the frequency content, and the duration of the sound. So, for example, short sound is perceived softer than longer sound. In this graph, we can see loudness is the red lines. So we can see in general that the loudness changes with frequency, and it's not linear. So it's pretty much what it means. To measure the loudness, we need specialized meters, and those are called loudness meters. So it's like the one in the picture. The unit is the LUFS, or loudness units full scale meters. We usually have different graphs in this kind of meters. For example, we have a momentary measurement, then we have a short time measurement, which is for a few seconds, and the integrated measurement, which measures the whole program or the whole song. We are going to see this in action in a few moments. Then we get to what is called the loudness normalization. In these days, loudness normalization means that every kind of piece of music or show or program or video should have a standard loudness level, and that's very important. Thanks to that, the loudness war is over, as we used to call it. Loudness war is this tendency of many music producers to try to make very loud tracks because they think that the louder the better, which actually is not really true. But thanks to these new tools for measuring, now we can forget about those ideas and start normalizing our music or our content. For example, in the case of iTunes, we have these levels of normalized programs. So for example, if you want to play your song in iTunes Store, it should be normalized around minus 12 LUFS. On the other hand, if you want to take that song for iTunes Radio, it is going to be normalized around minus 16 LUFS. This means that the loudness of every track in these streaming platforms is going to be pretty much the same loudness, thanks to this normalization. For example, if you are uploading music to YouTube, the normalization levels is a little different. It's around 13 LUFS. So it's a little louder than iTunes Radio, for example. In the case of Spotify, it's a different level. So you see that you have to masterize accordingly to what platform you are going to use. And that's very important for mastering these days. In the old days, for example, an audio CD, there wasn't this kind of meter. There wasn't a normalization. And so CDs could be as loud as possible, as loud as you wish. But in these days, we could say that CDs are usually around minus 9 LUFS. So if you are mastering for a CD, it should be a good point to take it around minus 9 LUFS. Finally, if we are working for speech material, then the normalization changes with countries or with different areas. For example, in Europe, there are standards. In America, there's a different standard. But we could say that generally, speech is around minus 23 LUFS, which actually is the loudness of these videos. I have mastered these videos trying to get around minus 23 LUFS. And so you can hear that pretty much every video has the same volume regarding my voice. So let's hear a practical example. Okay, now we get to the very last stage in the mastering process, which is the limiter. I have a limiter here, and I also have the loudness meter that we talked about. This is the final stage, and we cannot change that. Actually, we shouldn't do anything after that. As you can see, I have my processors here, and the last process is my limiter. The loudness is just a meter, a temporary meter. I'm going to remove this after using it. But the last process should be a limiter. And actually, all these other processors are entirely optional. Actually, as you can see, I don't have the reverb, and I don't have too many compressors for this sound. I decided to use only this. But the one that is crucial is the limiter, because it's going to set your final volume. In this case, let's master this, trying to do it for YouTube, for example, for a YouTube delivery. So I'm going to set my loudness meter at minus 13, as we saw. Here it is. Now my output ceiling is going to be around minus 0.3 dB. And I'm going to change my gain depending on what I'm reading here. So I have the three readings. It's the momentary, the short term, and the integrated result. So let's start.
When I held you in my
I'm going to start the meter.
arms, my love was doing the heart.
As we can see, this is pretty low, so I need more gain.
I know that I would. I feel blue. I know that I would.
I think I'm closer.
So blue, I ain't got you.
I can see that my integrated level is a little low. I have to get to the minus 13 lufts. That's better. Let's try it. This part is low there, so
When I held you in my arms, I thought that I could do no wrong. When I held you in my arms,
maybe a little
my
more.
love was doing the harm, and I feel
We can see here that our limiter is working only in the highest peaks, which is good because I'm not destroying the dynamics I have. So that's a good part. That's a great advantage using LUFS.
so blue,
So maybe that's good.
blue.
I would say this is a good level for YouTube delivery. I'm around minus 13 LUFS, which would work pretty well because these dynamics are going to prevail in my YouTube channel in this case. Now let's compare our track with the process that we made.
When I held you in my
This is the original one.
arms, my love was doing the heart. I feel blue.
And with the processors,
I know that I would.
that's our finished
I
product.
feel blue. I know that I would.
Now, for example, if I wanted to master for a CD, as we said, for CD production, we didn't have these loudness meters for many years, but nowadays it's usual to set it around minus 9. It depends on the style, actually, but let's try it.
When I held you in my arms, my love was
I need more gain.
doing the harm. I feel blue. I know that I would. I feel blue. I know that I would.
Maybe like that.
So blue, I ain't got
But
you.
as we can see here, we have more reduction, so our peaks get limited, and the dynamics is suffering the consequences of that. So that's the so-called loudness wars. Before this kind of meters, we didn't have any reliable measurement tool to compare loudness. And so every production was as loud as possible, which actually sometimes still prevails, but we have now the opportunity to change that and to preserve the dynamic range according to the final delivery media. But in the end, it's up to you, or maybe it's up to the client sometimes. Okay, the very last process that we have to use in mastering is dithering. So what is this about? Well, dither is a signal applied to improve the bit reduction process. This means that when we are reducing bits, usually from 24-bit to 16-bit, which is the most usual case in audio, we have to add the signal as we see in the diagram. We have a signal combined with dither, and then we go to the quantification stage, and then we reduce the number of bits. What is this for? Well, it reduces the truncation distortion, which occurs when we reduce the number of bits. And it also improves the perceived dynamic range. But of course, there's a cost in this. And the cost of using dither is that we add this kind of noise to the signal. So, well, that's not the good part. But anyway, dither is important. What is this truncation effect? Well, let's suppose that we have this sample of 24 bits audio. So we have our 24 bits. And then we have to truncate to 16 bits. In that case, we are losing information, important bits of information about our dynamic range. So we have to use dither to reduce this loss of information. That's why it's important. Here in the image, we can see a 20-bit audio signal, and then we reduce that to an 8-bit signal without dither, and we can see that there's a good amount of distortion because of the reduction. So if we add dither, on the other hand, we may see that there are these noisy parts, but in the end, for our ears, it's better to listen that kind of sound than to listen to a distortion. So that's why dither is the preferred method in these cases. Let's see a visual example. Dither is not only for audio, it's also used in image for the color palette. So, for example, let's see this image, which is a 24-bit palette, and we can see smooth colors in the image. Then, if we truncate that to an 8-bit palette, we can see this nasty color changes. On the other hand, if we apply dither and then we reduce the number of bits, we can see that there's a little noise in the image, but in general, it has more similitude to the 24-bit. There's a tool also in dithering which is called noise shaping. What is this about? Well, noise shaping distributes the dither spectral content to different zones where our ears are less sensitive. This helps to reduce this noisy sound to a lower level in a subjective way. So as we can see here, the dither is moved or applied in different frequencies, so our ear cannot perceive it that much, as in the last example. There are different types of dither. These are among the most popular. We have the power dither, the Apogee UV22, and there are many other commercial dithers. All of them make a good job. It's up to you to decide which one works best with the music or with the audio you are using. But remember, we have to use dither only once. It's used only once in the end of the whole process, just before reducing the number of bits. And if you are not reducing the number of bits, then you shouldn't use dither. It's only to go from 24 or more bits to 16 or less bits. The last part in the mastering process is to prepare the files for delivery. In this sense, we have to remember that we have to use WAV files and that the maximum peak should be around minus 0.3 dB maximum or minus 1 dB. We have to make sure that our file has the right fade in and fade out, that there's no clipping, no distortion, and that it has good mono compatibility. If we are preparing our track for audio CD, there are some standard specifications. The first and very important is the sampling rate. The sampling rate should be 44.1 kilohertz. It should be a 16-bit file. It should have proper dithering, and it should be burned at the lowest possible speed. If you are mastering for iTunes or for another website, you have to remember that the encoding process is going to make a loss of harmonics and dynamics. So make sure that you compensate for that. There's a new tendency to have high-resolution masters. High-resolution audio gives you more detail and more harmonics. These are also WAV files, but the sampling rate could be around 96 kilohertz or even more. They are 24-bit files, and this gives you more dynamic range. This gives you more resolution in harmonics, and they sound better. These are great for iTunes. In iTunes, you can sell this kind of files, also for Blu-ray or DVD. Unfortunately, people don't really like this kind of high-resolution audio. I don't know why. I hope this will change. But to date, we don't have too much demand for high-resolution audio. Anyway, this could change in any time. There's another way to deliver the files. If the manufacturing plant allows this, it's called the DDP file, which stands for Disk Description Protocol. This is a format for disk manufacturing. It has many advantages. For example, it allows for error correction, which is very important. It allows you to set the length and the gaps between tracks in your album. And they are regular WAV files. And you have to use specialized software to build these DDP files. So here are some examples of software. You can try them out. But some places do not accept this kind of files. So make sure that your plant really accepts DDP files before creating them. Very well. Now we finished our process. As we can see here, we applied all these processors, but the very last was the limiter. So our track is ready. Now we have to remember that we have to check the final decay and the final fade out. I'm going to see, because in this part we have a piano sounding, so let's check it out.
Blue, so blue, I and God.
We have to make sure that there are not funny noises there. I applied a little fade out here. Oh, works good. So that's important. Even if the song doesn't finish with a fade out, we have to create little fades for the final, and sometimes even for the beginning. So once our track is ready, now I'm going to prepare the bounce, the final bounce or mix down. In this case, I'm going to use the bounce function included in Logic. It's very important that our fader is at 0, and we are going to bounce it. In this case, Logic gives me many options for MP3 and other formats. I'm going to use PCM, which is the wave standard. And I'm going to use 16-bit resolutions for CD, 4400, which is the standard for CD, interleaved, and my dithering options. I have different kinds of dither. I could try different and see which one works best. I'm going to use for this demo the UV22, and that would be it. Notice that I'm not normalizing, not using any of that, because that's why we used a limiter to control the peaks. So there's no need for normalization, and the rest would be only to hit OK and to save the file with a name. In this way, our mastering process would be finished. Well, this is the end of the course. I hope it was useful for you. Remember that you can reach me for questions or doubts. And also I want to invite you to check out my other courses, mainly the equalization course and the compression course, which are a very good complement to the materials that we saw in this course. So I hope to see you in the next time, and bye-bye.